In the prison of Muhanga, Rwanda, inmates aren't sewing uniforms, they're practicing cannibalism. They have no choice. Guards deliberately withhold food. The cells resemble barracks from a concentration camp. 6,000 people are locked up, 10 times more than the legal capacity. Most of the time they walk over the corpses of their cellmates. Nearly 200 prisoners die here every month. Those who survive suffer from gangrene and necrosis. This is how people survive in what's said to be the most horrific prison on earth. But you may have noticed that the photos accompanying my story don't show anything especially terrifying. The inmates look fairly healthy. Sure, there are a lot of them, but it's not exactly like sardines in a can. That's because everything I just said is a lie. A widely repeated one. Rwanda is a poor country, much poorer than Kenya or Nigeria. The legacy of genocide still lingers, but not to this extreme. The same goes for stories about North Korea's Camp 22, where inmates are described as walking skeletons. The world's most brutal prisons makes for great clickbait, but usually stops there. In reality, prison is a much more complex institution than people think. No top 5 YouTube list is going to explain why prisons exist, what they're for, or how they function. And very few want to dive deep into that dark world. But it's both useful and fascinating to understand. Even in maximum security life sentence facilities, conditions are often more stable than internet horror stories suggest. Low conflict, outdoor walks, even licensed psychologists. All for free. The only catch? You can never leave. Which brings up the real question. Why are they even kept alive? It costs a fortune in taxpayer money. Wouldn't it be simpler to do it like in China? One bullet, end of story? But the truth is much more complicated. In this video, I'll break down what prisons are really for, how they started, and what happens when they stop working. We'll look at the most telling prisons, not the scariest, but the most revealing. How they're built, what they're built for, and what they say about the countries and people behind them. You're walking down a long, brightly lit corridor. Or more precisely, you're being escorted under each arm by armed guards. 2 stayed behind at the beginning of the corridor. 2 more can be seen in the distance, closer to the end. The corridor is underground. First, so you can't tell which block you've been taken to. Second, so there are no gaps in the prison's perimeter. The chance of escaping through this single tunnel is practically zero. While you're still trying to get your bearings, a massive door made of thick metal bars appears in front of you. It's already the 3rd one you've passed. 1 more lies ahead, leading to your section, and 2 more guard the cell itself. One of the cell doors is solid with a small slot. That's where your food will be passed through. No cafeteria visits. No walks with other inmates. You won't be getting letters from the outside. The only human contact you'll have is a visual check from guards and meal distribution. As for any connection to the outside world, you've got a 10-centimeter wide window, maybe a radio or a black and white TV, but only if you behave. You are now an inmate of ADX Florence, a true fortress at the foot of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. Getting in here takes more than murder or armed robbery. You're exceptional. You were transferred here from a regular prison because you were deemed too dangerous, either to other inmates or to prison staff. Maybe you killed someone in custody. You won't get that chance here. ADX Florence, or USP Florence AdMax, is a prison you can't escape from. And since we're already inside the cell, let's start there. The first thing you notice, there's no furniture. The table, stool, and bed are all poured concrete, fixed in place so they can't be dismantled, moved, or used as weapons or escape tools. The sink has no faucet for the same reason. Just buttons. It's built into the toilet to save space. You can't clog the drain and flood the cell. A special fail-safe system prevents that. The shower has no fixtures and water only runs at scheduled times each day. All conveniences are concentrated in one place. Arguably more efficient than a student hostel. And that's no accident. For the first year, all new inmates spend 23 hours a day in their cells. Every 3 months they're rotated, so no one can build relationships through walls or plan escapes. Prisoners are constantly monitored by guards who can lock down all 1,400 doors with a single button if anyone even tries to escape. Even the exercise yard is indoors, just a concrete box that looks like an empty swimming pool. After a year of perfect behavior, inmates are allowed a couple of hours there per day. After 3 more years, the most compliant are allowed to eat in a shared space and socialize with others on the path to rehabilitation. Finally, the lucky few, after at least 7 years, might get transferred to a less hellish facility. Not released, just moved. Most here are serving multiple life sentences. The place houses true celebrities of the criminal world. I'm not exaggerating. Everyone knows them. In the most secure block of ADX Florence sat, until recently, the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski and Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. And right now, on a concrete bed, sleeps the short man they call El Chapo. Just look at him the day he was brought in. There's no digging a tunnel out of here. These individuals pose such a danger to society and the state that the federal government built this prison with every risk in mind. And even though no one in nearly 30 years has managed to get past their own block, there are multiple layers of defense outside as well. Then there are the details: pressure sensors, a 4-meter barbed wire fence, and guards armed to the teeth with orders to shoot anything even vaguely resembling a human being. And that's not even the full list of security measures. For obvious reasons, prison administration doesn't share all their secrets. Now let's talk about why a monstrous facility like this exists at all, where keeping a single inmate costs American taxpayers $78,000 a year. Let's start from the top. In the last 60 years, the U.S. federal government has executed only 3 inmates. The statistics vary across different states, but that's beside the point. What matters is that during roughly the same period, 26 employees of the federal prison system were killed. For the government, that's a problem they take personally. Solving it with conventional means is nearly impossible. Think about it. Murderers of guards or fellow inmates are already among the most violent offenders. What do you do with someone like that? Lock them up? They're already serving hundreds of years in maximum security prisons, or as they call it in the US, Supermax. Their conditions are already as harsh as it gets. So the only viable option is to create a completely separate facility where incidents like these are close to impossible. That brings us to the first key point you need to understand. The core function of a prison system is minimizing harm to society. In plain terms, it means physically removing dangerous people from society so they can't commit more crimes. ADX Florence is the ultimate embodiment of this utilitarian philosophy. It makes breaking the law physically impossible by isolating criminals even from other criminals. This kind of thinking isn't new. Ancient societies had their own versions of it, like exile from the tribe, a primitive form of what we might call cancellation today. When modern states began to emerge, they added another layer. Take, for example, exile in the Russian Empire and later in the USSR. It wasn't just about banishing someone far away, it was about making them work for the state's benefit while being removed from society. In this logic, even a crime against an individual is viewed by the state as a challenge to its authority. Diyarbakir Prison in Turkey doesn't look like much. A standard layout, a modest fence, a couple of guard towers. The inmates seem fairly average too. It's located within the city, far from any tourist hotspots, closer to the Syrian border. But what makes this prison stand out is what happened there in the 1980s. To put it briefly, not everyone made it out. And not because they were serving life sentences or awaiting execution. Let's do the math. 299 people died from unsanitary conditions and torture. 14 died during hunger strikes. 16 were shot by guards during escape attempts. 43 took their own lives. Most of these deaths occurred between 1980 and 1984, when Turkey was ruled by a military junta following another coup. Human rights were not exactly a priority for that regime. We'll talk more about the junta later. For now, let's hear from the few who actually survived this place. Here's what the former mayor of Diyarbakir, who spent 11 years in that hellhole, recalled. When a new prisoner arrived, the warden would greet him at the gate, turn to the guards and say, "Give him a bath and take him to general population." That was a ritual. About 20 guards would beat the inmate to a pulp, then drag his limp body into a bathtub full of feces and leave him there for hours. And the torture didn't end there. Another survivor later said that while interrogations were brutal, the worst part was the time spent inside the cells. Remember the Stanford prison experiment? Whether you believe it was flawed or not, the point is, in that experiment, young men pretending to be guards forced other students to strip, urinate in the corner, and so on. Child's play by comparison. If you're sensitive, maybe skip the next part, because it gets dark. The incomplete list of what Diyarbakir's guards did includes sleep deprivation, starvation, denial of water, exhausting drills in extreme heat or cold, forced bathing in sewage. They called it disco. It was the 80s. They pulled out nails and teeth. They electrocuted prisoners. They tortured inmates in front of their families. Some prisoners were forced to salute the warden's German shepherd, which had been trained to bite off male genitals. And yes, there was equality. Women were tortured just as savagely as men. Diyarbakir was the complete opposite of ADX Florence. If Florence was built to minimize harm, this place seemed designed to maximize it. So here's the question. Who benefits from that kind of extreme cruelty? From institutionalized torture that results in regular deaths? Let's go back to the junta. When you seize power in a coup, your authority is weak. Your legitimacy? Almost non-existent. We covered this in our video on the concept of the deep state. So you've just taken power by force, and immediately there are plenty of angry citizens asking, who gave you the right? If you're in power, your priority becomes protecting that power. But you can't lock up the entire population. Even in Turkey, where they certainly tried, you'd run out of space. So the strategy becomes imprison just 1%, but make the punishment so brutal that the other 99% would never dare speak out. It's a universal rule under any authoritarian regime, not just military juntas. If you want people to obey, then the consequences of rebellion must be more than unpleasant. That brings us to the second major function of prison: punishment. In ancient times, people didn't do prison sentences. It was either a fine or straight to execution. Sometimes it was an eye for an eye. A fine wasn't about preventing crime. It was just the cost of doing it. Executions were a bit more complex. That's where Foucault and his concept of biopower come in. If executing a criminal is the sovereign's personal show of power over an individual subject, then prison is a system where that power is distributed evenly across the shaved heads and identical uniforms of inmates, and across the many faceless decision-makers behind the scenes. Prison hides that power. It's not on public display. It's buried behind gray walls and barbed wire, much more in line with the spirit of the modern state, where control is exercised by bureaucrats in quiet offices. Inmates can be counted, sorted into neat groups, and their punishment optimized to benefit the state. Remember what we said earlier? If it helps the state, it helps society. Which brings me back to something I mentioned before. One of the simplest ways to understand justice and the prison system in particular is through retributivism. In short, we punish criminals because they deserve to suffer. An eye for an eye is the clearest example. But these days, we tend to favor a more pragmatic framework, hidden behind the intimidating term consequentialism, meaning we evaluate punishment based on its outcomes. And even Diyarbakir Prison, for all its medieval torture tactics, followed this model. When rumors of torture reach every household, no sane person wants to end up there. People stay home. They shut up. And that's when the real debate begins. What's more effective? The cruelty of the punishment or its inevitability? Turns out both factors matter equally. But there's a catch. A potential criminal might think twice about stealing or killing if they really grasp what kind of hell awaits them. Yet for the few who still end up in prison, there's no going back. Harsh punishment and inhumane conditions strip away their humanity. In other words, reintegration into society after release becomes nearly impossible. That's why recidivism is high in countries with outdated, over-bureaucratized prison systems. Turkey, for example, is near the top in Europe. Speaking of bureaucracy, Diyarbakir Prison today is pretty ordinary. Standard cells, regular guards. Because of its dark past, there have been plans to shut it down for over a decade. But they still can't decide what to do with it. Should they turn it into a museum like Alcatraz, Or maybe a children's educational center? You know, so kids grow up understanding what happens when you challenge a military junta. The paperwork drags on and the debate keeps circling. Meanwhile, the prison runs like nothing ever happened. The same cells where people were tortured are still filled with inmates. So what does all this tell us? That there's public order that must be upheld through isolation and threats that must be curbed through punishment. But what happens when you combine a crumbling sense of order with truly inhuman conditions? You get the prisons of El Salvador. While most world leaders prefer not to talk too much about prisons, El Salvador's young president, Nayib Bukele, shoots promo videos about them. He's proud of them. Look at the massive prison I built. Look at the elite guards. Look how scared the inmates look. They sit packed tightly together on the floor in the middle of a huge, brightly lit hall. That's the new terrorism confinement center in the municipality of Tekaluca, which opened just recently. The local population, about 30,000 people. The prison, designed to hold 40,000. Right now, it's just over 10% full. So what exactly is the president showing off? A massive complex covering 170 hectares, about the same size as Universal Studios Hollywood in California. It's tucked far away from the public eye, with its own independent water and power systems separate from the city's grid. CECOT, as it's called, has 8 blocks, all surrounded by a 15,000-volt electric fence. At the entrance to each block is the most advanced X-ray scanner they could find in the country, plus a full surveillance system. Each block contains multiple modules with 80 beds, 2 toilets, and 2 sinks per module. The kicker? The modules are meant for 100 people. That works out to just 0.6 square meters per inmate. No mattresses. You'll wash up only when the guards say so. Solitary cells are only marginally better. At least they have plumbing, but there's no lighting, no windows, just total darkness, almost 24/7. Everything else, however, is flooded with light. Inside, outside, every wall is sterilized white like a hospital. CECOT is nothing like the old Salvadoran prisons. Those were cages packed with tattoo-covered bodies. Now, it's spotless. The staff is elite too. 1,000 top-level guards, 600 soldiers, and 250 specially trained police officers. Each block has its own weapons depot and armor storage. Each of the 19 watchtowers is manned by 7 soldiers, and the staff? They live like kings. There's a gym, furnished personal quarters, and even a lounge area with ping pong. These new prisons are Bukele's personal project. He once said, gang members used to have prostitutes, PlayStations, TVs, cell phones, and computers, while soldiers and guards slept on the floor. Now it's the other way around. Inmates' only activity now is weaving on a textile machine. The rest of the time they sit, stand, march in line, or get their arms twisted by prison guards. Everything's by the book. CECOT is the biggest prison in El Salvador, in Latin America, and possibly in the world. It's a tiny country, smaller than Belgium, Israel, or Switzerland, and yet it built something this enormous. Where did this come from? Chances are you have no clue how off-the-charts crime is in El Salvador. Colombia, Mexico, they're just standing on the sideline. That's why this country earned the title of the crime capital of the world. In El Salvador, anyone who could and wanted to ended up joining a street gang. Many of them have multiple murders behind them, and others don't know how to do anything in life besides extortion or selling drugs. If you're a street vendor, don't worry, they'll come for their cut. If you were born in a poor neighborhood, which is basically anywhere in the country, half your friends are probably addicts. The chance of getting hit by a stray bullet is high, whether it's from gang shootouts or constant police sirens outside. In Mexico, this kind of madness happens in the worst neighborhoods. In El Salvador, it's just everyday life. So the main goal of these flashy prison ads is to give ordinary people a sense of safety. Salvadorans might remember what safety is, but they've long forgotten what it feels like. Now get this, in 2015, the murder rate in El Salvador was over 100 per 100,000 people. In a country of 6.5 million, that meant 18 people killed every single day. That's more than 6,500 per year. For comparison, Denmark and Serbia with similar population sizes, had just 50 and 100 murders that same year. In 2015, Bukele became mayor of the capital. By 2019, he was president. And here's what happened to the murder rate. At least according to official stats, it started dropping fast until it reached under 8 per 100,000 last year. That's not a miracle, but it's a 10-fold drop in 7 years. And if you ask the average Salvadoran, they'll tell you, yeah, people are getting killed a lot less. It's not as scary standing outside anymore. But there's a dark side to this miracle that Bukele has become the face of. First, the prison population has reached 1% of the entire country. That's 3 times higher than Russia and nearly double the already insane US numbers. And if it were just actual criminals behind bars, maybe it'd make sense. But in this war on gangs, police often arrest people without trial, just on suspicion, say of having ties to drug dealers. No lawyers, no contact with family. Why? Because last year Bukele declared a state of emergency. Under emergency law, constitutional rights mean nothing. Freedom is sacrificed for safety and crime control. The problem? Absolute power is addictive. It's easy to declare a state of emergency, hard to lift it. But the authorities got what they wanted. The murder rate plummeted. Bukele is more popular than the Pope, and there's no intention of loosening the grip. Dissenters can be locked up without fuss. Gang leaders can be cut secret deals, fewer killings in exchange for better prison conditions. And that's what the mega prison promo is all about. To the average citizen, it says, the bad guys are locked up, the streets are calm, safety is back. A little loss of freedom and some human rights violations, worth it. And the prison does a decent job of selling that image, which brings us to another key role of the penitentiary system, to secure the state's monopoly on violence. Prisons help take control of territory and power away from gangs and hand it over to the government, making it the one true authority. The right to punish and pardon, that's now up to the state. That's the monopoly on violence. And a state of emergency is its most extreme form, concentrating power at the top. This is where Foucault's idea of biopower hits its peak. Look at the inmates again, every one of them on the same schedule, down to the minute, down to every movement. The goal isn't just shaved heads, it's to turn 1,000 criminals into one machine, a single body the authorities can control completely. And here we find another concept that Foucault exposed: disciplinary power. When the state controls your body completely, it starts to take over your mind too. After a while, there's no need for threats or violence. People break from the inside. They start policing themselves like they're living in an invisible prison. That seems to be Bukele's real goal, rewiring how young men in El Salvador think about life. In the US, ADX Florence does it by cutting off all options. Diyarbakir in Turkey does it through fear. The first method only works on those already in prison. The second scares off future criminals. El Salvador is unique in that it turns gangsters into bio-robots and crushes innocence along the way, with the rest of society constantly living under the sword of Damocles. If the goal is order, not happiness, this brutal approach might just work. Everyone's tired of endless gang wars. But no prison system, no government can survive on violence alone. If all you've got is the stick and no carrot, what comes next is chaos. And that's exactly what Haiti shows us. This video started with a fake story about a Rwandan prison, cannibalism, and all kinds of horrors. Places like that don't exist, at least none we know of. But there is one that comes close. Welcome to the National Penitentiary in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. Imagine stepping into a subway car at rush hour. You're pressed into a solid wall of people. You can't move your arms, turn your head, or breathe freely. Now imagine living like that for years. That's what inmates in Port-au-Prince experience. Before you even step inside, you hear it. A deep, low hum. It's the sound of thousands of men groaning, coughing, begging the guards for food or water. From the outside, the place looks surprisingly ordinary. Solid 10-meter-high walls, watchtowers, well-equipped soldiers. Everything seems in order until you pass the gates. Inside, it's a nightmare. Filthy, crumbling dorms, human waste on the floor. The stench is so strong it peels paint from the walls and fogs up your glasses. Next to one of the blocks lies a sack. Inside, someone's corpse. In the infirmary, the ones who haven't died yet, they look like mummies, and they won't last much longer. Let's move on to the cells. The sick in the infirmary at least have mattresses. In the blocks, you sleep on the floor or in a hammock. If there's no room, you stand. Another subway skill. This facility was designed for 800 people. It holds 4,000. That means cells meant for one now cram in 5. There's a kitchen, yes. Inmates cook for other inmates. The prison is technically connected to a water and power supply, but there's almost nothing to cook with. Food is scarce. Occasionally, a small shipment of rice arrives. But even when ingredients make it through, it doesn't guarantee a hot meal. One inmate, a prison cook doing 15 years for murder, explains, sometimes the power cuts out for a month or 2. Try cooking without it. And the plumbing burst last year. No one ever fixed it. Since then, only the guards have clean water. Now here's the worst part. Most inmates here aren't even criminals. Like many prisons in Haiti, Port-au-Prince doubles as a pretrial holding center. By law, detainees can't be held without trial for more than 48 hours. On paper.
Aux autorités de la justice qu'il faut questionner sur le nombre des détenus qui sont en détention préventive prolongée. C'est pas à moi de juger les autorités de la justice.
Unlike El Salvador's blinding white super prison, here inmates actually have contact with the outside world. Family and friends bring them food and water, and charities try to help with treatment, vitamins, and supplements. But even that's a challenge. Local gangs often block the roads. In recent months, 20 people have died in Port-au-Prince prison. Last year was worse, 185 deaths. That's a mortality rate of nearly 5%. How did it get this bad? 2 key reasons. First, the cost. Let's count. Utilities, infrastructure, staff salaries, food, building maintenance, security system upgrades. Haiti is simply too poor for all that. The country's GDP is 140 times smaller than Apple's market cap. So where do you spend the tiny budget you do have? It's not going to average citizens and definitely not inmates. If you want to rule a poor, crumbling country like Haiti, your top spending priority has to be the security apparatus. The army, police, maybe some secret services. Those guys have guns. You need them loyal. In Haiti, cops and guards live relatively well. Everyone else gets the scraps. That's one of the signs of a failing state, a government teetering on the edge of losing its monopoly on violence. To hold on to power, it fills prisons with people. Killers and drug dealers, sure, but plenty of innocent people get chewed up in the machine too, thanks to broken institutions. That's where the second factor comes in, the one that makes Haitian prisons truly horrific. And that brings us to one of the prison system's darker side effects. It becomes a zone of death. Let me explain. Cameroonian historian and political theorist Foucault and Mbembe, one of our contemporaries, came up with a term, necropolitics. It's basically the opposite of Foucault's biopolitics. Biopolitics is about how the state nurtures life, keeping people healthy and productive. Necropolitics is about choosing who gets to die. A death space is where those choices get carried out. Think of Caribbean slave plantations, or prisons like Port-au-Prince, which, not coincidentally, isn't far from where those plantations once stood. You could say the same about Diyarbakir Prison, but the mechanism is different. In Haiti, no one's torturing inmates. That would cost money and effort. The system just lets them die. It's cheap, quiet, and it kills 2 birds with 1 stone, gets rid of both criminals and poor nobodies, while reinforcing the government's control over death itself. In a failing state, real prisons are too expensive, but they're not needed anyway. This is rational, calculated brutality. For now, Haiti's government manages to cling to its monopoly on violence, keeping the security forces just happy enough, at the expense of those sacrificed to the prison system. But it can always get worse. Remember that carrot and stick analogy? It only works if both are present. The moment the monopoly on violence slips away completely, everything falls apart. In some countries, prisons are unofficially divided into 2 types. Ones where the administration holds full control, and others where inmates make the key decisions. In the first, order is enforced by the state. In the second, it's maintained by an internal hierarchy and shot callers who manage everything, from daily routines to conflict resolution. This self-governed prison model is still widespread in places like Ecuador. And one of the most extreme examples is the Littoral Penitentiary in Guayaquil, officially named the Men's Social Rehabilitation Center #1. Just look at the headlines: riots, mass killings, lockdowns, spikes in violence. September 2021, 123 dead. November that same year, another 68. April 2023, at least 12 more. None of these deaths were caused by guards. The reason becomes clear the moment you look at the prison layout. It has 12 pavilions. Pavilion 1, 4, and 11 are under the control of the Latin Kings. Pavilion 2 is run by Los Chone killers. Pavilions 3, 5, 6, 7, and 12 belong to Los Choneros. The guards and administration barely control the bathroom block and the staff building, if that. All these riots and massacres happen because of gang rivalries. We won't dive into gang politics here. Let's just figure out how Ecuador got to a place where criminals feel safer inside prison than outside. Turns out, losing control over your prison system is surprisingly easy. You only need 3 things: stop funding rehabilitation programs, undertrain your personnel, and let corruption spread unchecked. Forget rehab, fine, but neglecting the security forces, that's fatal. We saw this already with Haiti. Even with the horrific conditions there, fewer prisoners die than in wealthier Ecuador. The government has allowed a parallel power structure to flourish inside its prisons, and those guys do whatever they want. To grasp the scale of the problem, gangs extort families of inmates for money, $100 a month just so their loved ones can eat. Keep in mind the average salary in Ecuador is less than $500. Gang leaders decide who stays where, and yes, they have guns and grenades. During riots, they use them. Obviously, they're not smuggling this stuff in with drones or laundry deliveries. It's coming through the front door, with the silent approval of prison staff. Guayaquil is a textbook case of what happens when a prison fails at every single function it's supposed to fulfill. Isolating criminals and maintaining order? Total failure. When gangs run the place, prison just becomes an extension of street life. A kind of boot camp where you network and upgrade your criminal skills. Once these inmates get out, society will be even worse off than before. Then there's deterrence, punishment meant to scare others into obeying the law. Again, no difference between prison and the streets of Ecuador. You can rob and kill wherever you want, and gang members know it. So do ordinary citizens, who understand that the state can't protect them anywhere, inside or out. You could get shot anywhere. That's why prison isn't even that scary. Next up, monopoly on violence. In this sense, Ecuador's prisons are the exact opposite of El Salvador's. Everyone lives in fear except for the most ruthless thugs. The state has lost its exclusive right to use force. Now anyone with a weapon and willpower can. Finally, the death space idea. The state using prison as a place to preserve control through violence. In Guayaquil, only the death part remains. Ecuador's government broke the cardinal rule of incarceration: feed your guards. Now the whole country is barreling toward failed state status. Global indexes can't capture how deep this collapse is. Power is fragmented among armed gangs. The country is ungovernable. Presidential candidates are gunned down in broad daylight by hired sicarios, just like we showed in our video on Pablo Escobar, which you can watch on this channel. One suspect in a major political assassination has been locked up since 2011. Where? You guessed it, Guayaquil. This is footage of him being transferred to a higher security facility. But as you can imagine, for people like him, prison walls mean nothing. All of this happened because Ecuador failed to build a functioning prison system. That's what happens when you don't invest. That's why civilized, well-run prisons matter. This entire video, we've been descending deeper into the madness of incarceration. But now let's take the elevator up, straight into Europe, where some prisons look like paradise. Anders Breivik never doubted what he was doing. To this day, the terrorist doesn't see himself as guilty. He was sentenced to 21 years in prison, renewable until his death. And to be fair, the conditions he lives in are better than those of most average citizens in South America or Africa. In Norway, Breivik's homeland, there are only 58 prisons in total, each holding on average just 66 inmates. Even so, the prison system runs at only 80% capacity. The Ila prison, where Breivik is serving what's effectively a life sentence, holds 123 prisoners. During the Nazi occupation, it was used as a concentration camp. Now it houses the most dangerous criminals from both Norway and Sweden. It doesn't hold up against ADX Florence, just a basic fence and brick walls. Each cell has a large window. Instead of hundreds of guards and dogs, there are psychologists and social workers, sometimes even Labradors. You've probably heard what these cells look like: regular home furniture, a TV, a fridge. Some even have gyms. Inmates can receive personal items from the outside, from books to musical instruments. Inside and out, it looks more like a college dorm. Breivik lives like royalty. They built him a private wing and a yard where he can walk alone. Instead of a cramped cell, he's got a 3-room setup, a bedroom, an office, and a gym. He even has a gaming console and a computer, though it's not connected to the internet. He spends his time alone, but still has access to everything law-abiding Norwegians do: healthcare, education, even the right to vote. In 2015, he enrolled in political science at the University of Oslo. And still, the man who murdered 77 people constantly complains to his lawyer, the Norwegian government, and the European Court of Human Rights. His list of grievances is surreal. A rubber pen grip chafes his hand. Food is heated in a microwave. He's not allowed to start a political party. The console is too old. The government payments are too small. And some of these demands are actually granted. Remember when we talked about consequentialism, the idea that justice is about reducing crime, not inflicting suffering? In Norway, that principle is taken to the extreme. The prison system plays a minor role. Most offenders serve their sentences outside, in something like community service under police supervision. Only the truly dangerous, the violent offenders, are locked up. To put it in perspective, in all of 2022, Norway recorded just 29 homicides. That's about as many as El Salvador sees on a weekend. So the first function of prisons, isolating criminals, just isn't as relevant. Instead, the priority is rehabilitation. We all want people who caused us pain to suffer. American philosopher Robert Nozick coined the term indifference curve. Here's how it works. Someone steals $100 from you, your well-being drops. But if the thief is caught and pays you back with interest, your curve levels out again. You're no longer upset because your loss was fully compensated. That's what prisons should aim for, restoring harm done to victims and the state. But with murder, this breaks down. No compensation can bring things fully back. At best, maybe 70 to 80%. Executing or torturing the murderer won't truly make up for the loss either. Eye for an eye justice might have worked in small communities, but not at the scale of a modern nation-state. In the long run, that path only leads to more unhappiness and more crime. Lock someone in a cage, feed them slop, beat them. They'll come out broken, incapable of normal life. And that means more crime. Rehabilitation programs give inmates a chance to reintegrate. They get an education, go to church, learn a trade. Some even become fashion designers or farmers. So instead of attacking someone the moment they're released, they go straight to work. Norway barely needs prisons at all. They just reform people. That's why their recidivism rate stays under 20%. In the US and Russia, for comparison, 44% of released inmates return to prison within a year. It's also about money. While someone's locked up, the state pays for them. On the outside, they pay taxes. And in a welfare state like Norway, every citizen represents a serious public investment. Sending that investment to rot in a cell is throwing money away. Of course, Norway's low crime rate isn't just about soft prisons. It's also about the broader social environment. Still, even the best system will sometimes produce monsters like Breivik and not know what to do with them. But those are rare, high-profile cases. For the most part, the justice system is designed for rehabilitation. Sure, prisons still serve other roles, some isolation, some deterrence, some monopoly on violence. Even in a country with soft prisons, a sentence still carries shame and a loss of reputation, and Norwegians care deeply about that. A prison isn't just a locked space, it's a projection of society in its most concentrated form. Inside, what's hidden behind storefronts and slogans on the outside comes into focus: the value of human life, the nature of power, the limits of fear, and the possibility of forgiveness. Some prisons punish, others try to reform, and some simply rot along with the inmates inside them. But every prison is a reflection of our collective will. We don't build them just for criminals, we build them to reassure ourselves that we're still on the outside of the bars. If you found this more interesting than terrifying, hit like and share this video with your friends and colleagues. A new story is coming very soon. See you then.